What is the secret to making a great game? To answer that question, we have to take a trip back in time. Our story begins in the 1970s, when these two crazy dudes release a game called Dungeons & Dragons, D&D. Friends in basements everywhere gathered to form playing parties and participate in fantastical stories where they got to be the adventurers, the heroes of a particular story, or even an entire world. One person is designated the DM, the Dungeon Master, who then proceeds to build a world and allow their friends, the players, to live out their wild fantasies and ridiculous character choices by accommodating them on the fly, letting them live out every nerdy dream they ever had of slaying dragons and making sweet love to orc women. But don't you dare mock them, because those nerds are you and me. For you see, it is here that the story of role-playing video games begins. D&D and other tabletop games provided the formula that RPG games still use to this day. Everything from the build your own character, choose your race, class, and stats formula, down to so many of the turn-based combat systems and fantasy settings that we see used in modern day gaming. If you've ever cast a magical spell in a video game, it probably has an equivalent in the D&D canon. But why does any of that matter? Well, because, like it or not, this was peak role-playing, and video games from then till now have wanted to tap into the magic of that experience, of that same feeling of spontaneity and freedom. In 2023, we've been lucky enough to have two games drop that are already considered some of the greatest of all time: Baldur's Gate 3 and Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, alongside plenty of other great titles. What's not a coincidence is that these two in particular are games that have given players unprecedented levels of choice. Tears of the Kingdom is a developer's wet dream, giving players incredible tools that they can use to manipulate practically any object in the world that they find and use them in combat, exploration, and most impressively, puzzle solving. This clip, for example, has wowed game developers around the world because of how seamlessly each independent object in this puzzle interacts with each other. The wheels, which are an activatable gadget, the platform they're attached to, and of course, the rope bridge, which unfolds. All things the players can manipulate and therefore break. Over 15 million people have seen this clip and its amazing display of creative thinking, both on the part of the developers and the players. Baldur's Gate, meanwhile, is literally just a D&D campaign in video game form. Players can take just about 15 different paths on how to approach each significant action in the game, just as if they had a real DM allowing them that freedom. Now, while there is so much excellence in these two titles all around, what I think has truly made them stand out so much is that feeling of choice and creative expression on the part of the player. And I'm here to tell you that this is the secret to making a great video game in the modern era.
That's why Baldur's Gate 3 is by far the game of the decade, because that game is truly like, you want to do it that way? Yes, do it that way. I only ran into, I think, 2 occasions in my 80 hours of Baldur's Gate where I said, oh, I want to do it this way. Oh, I can't. 2. It takes the choice of video games and surpasses everything I've ever played.
When video games were starting out in the 70s and 80s, most of them borrowed from the tabletop genre. Games like Zork and Rogue, which is where the subgenre roguelike comes from, were essentially just attempts to make a Dungeons & Dragons campaign come to life. But as the technical scope of games evolved and we entered the era of console gaming, with it came new demands and a new direction. The nature of video games is that they have to be prepared, they have to be finite. Unlike a dungeon master who can improvise with what their party does, a game has to have a response ready to everything a player can do, otherwise it can't be allowed. On top of that, there were additional constraints like storage space for floppy disks and CDs, remember those? Which meant that games had to be shippable. They couldn't be 10 disks of material that would be impractical to ship and expensive to develop. Because of how consoles worked, all of a sudden RPGs started approaching things differently. Rather than give a player the full freedom of creating their own character, deciding their own story, and making their own choices, games started to come with their own set story. The rise of Japanese gaming in particular was super influential in pioneering a different approach to gaming. Inspired by their native anime and manga of the region, JRPGs began to focus on telling the story of a small group of well-defined characters. And the player was no longer the central figure. They were merely a vehicle. Sure, you controlled the combat and the main hero, but it was someone else's story being told. not yours. You are now a part of a spectacle, like a movie watcher who could actually immerse themselves in the art they were consuming and feel some sense of interactivity. Titles like Final Fantasy VII revolutionized what video games could be, telling intricate stories with loads of side quests and minigames to explore, alongside an engaging combat system and a powerful social message. For a long time, this became the new default, until things changed again. Where JRPGs swung the pendulum one way, it feels like we're watching it swing back to the other. We've now reached an era where video games are a gigantic industry, bigger than film and music combined. The development of video games has become, accordingly, that much more sophisticated. Where games could be made by a small room full of developers, now entire teams consisting of hundreds of well-trained industry professionals are behind your favorite projects. The two I mentioned before, Baldur's Gate 3 and Tears of the Kingdom, had 400 and 1100 developers respectively, working for years to put out the masterpieces they did. And with that kind of firepower, the scope of what you can do with a video game starts to expand again. All of a sudden, players can be allowed 100 different options for how to approach a scenario because the game system can actually account for each of those. And with digital releases, you don't have to worry about disc size anymore. In the case of Tears of the Kingdom, the engine was so cleanly made that no amount of tomfoolery with powers could break it, and the wacky results that have followed have genuinely been an amazing thing for all of gaming to see. In the case of Baldur's Gate, well, they literally built out dialogues and combats and scenes for all the choices you could possibly make, and gamers have loved it. When you look at the most popular games of all time, it's not Call of Duty or even Fortnite, it's a game developed by a then unknown studio, Mojang, who made something called Minecraft. With over 200 million copies sold, Minecraft is by far and away the highest selling video game of all time, and it promises one thing and one thing only: complete creative freedom for the player. There is no story, there is no plot, there are no characters, just boxes, pixels, and the chance to make whatever your mind can dream of. And that's exactly what people have done. In Minecraft, people have made everything from the Titanic to Van Gogh paintings, and of course, famous locations from other games. At first thought, you might feel this is all rather surprising. I mean, we live in an age where movies, TV, anime, music, and just works of fiction are such a common part of our lives. We consume so much media passively. It turns on, we watch, then we turn it off. As a consumer, we have little to no input on what we're consuming. You think we treat video games the same. And while, as we've said, video games can provide that, their unique appeal is in what you can do to them, not just what they can do for you. In our everyday lives, we can often feel so powerless. If you want to create something or make a piece of art, you're constrained by, amongst other things, money and expertise. If I wanted to sculpt today, where would I even begin? Where does one just find a block of marble, and how the hell do I sculpt it? But video games allow that expression of individuality and creativity with absolutely no barrier to entry. It's the job of the game to simplify these processes as much as possible. And like a loving parent, a game developer can give you all the tools you need to watch you thrive and allow you to make what they themselves might never have imagined. No matter what your starting point, a few hours put into a game, and you could be doing things and creating things that would just never be possible in real life, but all of a sudden are now second nature to you in this alternate reality. Well, now the same goes with storytelling. We can't all be heroes in our day-to-day, and we certainly can't be medieval warriors, but for a few hours in our lives, we can when we turn on our favorite video game. And why shouldn't we? It's not surprising at all that when given the choice, what gamers truly love, what truly sticks with them, are the games that allow them the freedom to just be who they want to be. When you look at where we started, this was always the promise. As gamers, we began as D&D nerds, wanting to be adventurers in our own stories, to explore worlds with seemingly no limits, just a gentle guiding hand from a friend to make sure we all had a good time. Well, now we've gotten there again, and don't be surprised if you see more games seek to give players that experience, that magic of freedom. That feeling that you aren't just following a set path and hitting the edges of a small box you're confined in constantly, but instead that you're soaring through the sky with every direction open to you. Because as much as we love sometimes being told what to do, what we as human beings really love is when we get to do what we want to do. And that's what a truly great game provides. And that's it for this video. If you've enjoyed it, then please consider supporting this channel directly via Patreon, the link to which is in the video description. I want to give a huge shout out to my current patrons who do the awesome job of supporting me, and also, if you enjoy video essays like this, then check out my other channel, The Soak, where I do TV and movie breakdowns. But that's it for now. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you soon.